Hi everyone, I've been making Lone Star quilts a little bit lately. One of them is the Third Story Workshop Swan quilt, the Our Song, Your Reflection quilt. And I've also been designing my own for Make Modern magazine, which will come out, I believe this is the September issue. Lone Star quilts are made up of 45-degree diamonds. So these pieces here, but because of they're not at 90 degrees like squares, it can make matching these points up a little tricky. So here's a particularly good one that I have there. I'm just going to go through a little video today to show you how I piece those together. It does take a little bit of time, but it's a little technique that works for me. So here we have my latest project, and I already have my diamonds in a row. I have 5 strips to piece together, and these are where I want them to match. I've got these little points where they'll meet. So what I like to do is to grab a pen, and by a pen I mean one that's going to remove. I don't recommend chalk for this because it won't rub off so easily because you're getting right into where the seams are. I have been using a Frixion pen. This is a Frixion pen. They iron off when heated, so the lines disappear. They have a bit of a bad rep because if you have it in a very cold situation, the lines can come back on your quilt. So bear that in mind. And if what I show you today, if you still don't want to use the Frixion pen, you can also use an air erasable or a water erasable marker pen for this. So the first thing I like to do is get my smallest ruler that I have, and then I line this up with my first strip. Okay, so I need to be, this edge is joining this one, so this is the edge that I'm concerned with. I'm going to mark where the 1/4 of an inch point is, but just where the seams are. I'm not going to draw a big long line. That would be too much pen. I'm using a Frixion pen. I know to be cautious with those. So I have my 1/4 of an inch here, and I'm just going to make some little marks on the front of the fabric. So that's kind of the important thing. Show you that a little bit closer. I've made these little marks just across the seams. Next thing I want to do is line that up with the next strip. So this time I'm going to flip it over. I'm actually just going to press that seam again. Be right back. Alright, make sure you do all your ironing before you do your marking, especially if you're using a Frixion pen, or you'll have to do it all again. So this piece is going to go over here because we need right sides together. So I'm actually going to mark on the back on this one, and that again will be where the thread is, because that's where the seam ends and where it's going to come in contact with that 1/4 of an inch. So here is my 1/4 of an inch, and again making little marks. This is the back though, so if you did want to make bigger marks you could do. I don't know why you would need to, but you could. So now I have my marks on the back of this piece and my marks on the front of this piece. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 seams, and so I need 4 pins. Now I'm not much of a pinner, so this is one of the very few situations that I would actually pin. I'm left-handed, I'm just going to kind of switch this around so that my marks are closest to me. And I'm going to put that pin through the seam on the back of that where we've marked. So that's where the pen mark and the seam crosses. I'm just going to flip it over and just check on the front that my pin is actually coming right out of that seam, because sometimes those seams, if you've pressed them and they have a little bit of give in them, they might be just slightly off. So now I found that point, I'm now going to put my pin through the front where I've marked my other piece, and that again will be where those 2 bits of fabric meet and that pen line, so where that junction is. I push my pin all the way through so I know that those are stacked together correctly, and then I pin. So that's my first one, and then I keep on working my way across. So again, in from the back through the seam. Check the front, make sure you're happy with that, and then find the next seam and line intersection. Stick through there, Make sure the pin goes all the way through so you know that they're lining up, and then make the pin. Okay, now we're pinned, we'll go to the machine. So first things first, you're going to want to make sure that you're sewing at the sides with the marks and the pins, not the other side. Especially with the first two rows together, it can be hard to remember which is which. I'm going to make sure that the edges of my fabric are matched up all the way down because we haven't got pins at the start and end. I'm going to stick that under my machine and begin to sew. As I get closer to the pins, I am going to move them out slightly. Also, with me having a seam guide on my machine, I do have to be careful that the pins don't hit against it and start to twist. That has happened to me recently. I'm right up against the pin now, but I don't necessarily want to sew over it. Some of the time sewing over it does work out okay, but you can end up bending your needle a little bit and damage your needle plate, all of that kind of thing. So as you get to really close to that pin, you're going to slide it out and keep going. Close enough, pull that pin. Just making sure that that one's going over the seam guide now. And you see how this does take a little bit more time than other kinds of sewing can. That's my last pin. That comes out. And as you did with the beginning, just make sure that these last little bits are lining up against those edges. You'll notice that in most cases, unless you've had the points chopped off like I did at the start, you will have a bit of a triangle overlapping here, but that is completely fine because as we get to the bottom here, you'll notice that your seam will finish here, and that's going to be in your seam allowance, so that'll make that, and these two rows match up perfectly. Okay, so we do still have our marks because we used the friction pen, but when we open it up, this is why I don't recommend necessarily having chalk, because I do have a little bit of a visible pen line here and here. Not so bad at the beginning, but you'll see that this creates nice little points. It can depend a bit on your accuracy of your 1/4 of an inch as well, so make sure you check your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I do have a video for that too, because these guides, the width of your foot isn't always accurate, and neither is the needle plate, so you might just want to check that. And sometimes also it varies with different threads and different needles because of the thickness of the needle and that kind of thing. So it does take a tiny bit of trial and error, but I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm now ready to add my next strip in exactly the same way.